My name is Barbara. I'm 56 years old, and nothing prepared me for what I saw that Christmas Eve. My daughter Elizabeth shivering outside her own home, lips blue from cold while inside my son-in-law's family laughed by the fireplace, champagne glasses clinking. The moment our eyes met, I knew something was terribly wrong. I rushed to her, wrapped my arms around her trembling body, and made a decision that would change everything. If you're watching this video, I'd love to know where you're from in the comments below. Please hit that like and subscribe button and stay with me as I share how I fought to save my only child. The bond between a mother and daughter is special. Elizabeth was my world after my husband John passed away when she was only 12. We navigated grief together, finding strength in each other. Those years weren't easy, but we formed an unbreakable connection that I thought would withstand anything. Elizabeth was always brilliant. Even as a little girl, she had this sparkle in her eyes when she talked about becoming a lawyer someday. I worked 2 jobs to make sure she could chase that dream. When she got accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, I cried tears of joy. We celebrated with a small cake in our kitchen, just the 2 of us making plans for her future. All through college, we spoke nearly every day. She would call to tell me about her classes, her internships, and her friends. I lived for those calls, hearing the excitement in her voice as she discovered who she was meant to be. After graduation, she landed a job at a prestigious law firm in Chicago. I was so proud watching her walk across that stage in her cap and gown, knowing all her hard work had paid off. Then she met Matthew. At first, she would mention him casually during our calls, a colleague at her firm who had asked her to dinner. She sounded happy, and that's all I wanted for her. But something changed in her voice when she talked about him. A hesitation I couldn't quite place. The first time I met Matthew was at a restaurant in downtown Chicago. He arrived 15 minutes late without apologizing. I noticed how he ordered for Elizabeth without asking what she wanted. Throughout dinner, he dominated the conversation, talking about his family's wealth and connections. Whenever Elizabeth tried to speak, he would subtly cut her off or redirect the conversation back to himself. "Your daughter is quite the find," he told me, as if Elizabeth was an object he had discovered. "A bit rough around the edges, but my mother will help with that." I remember looking at Elizabeth's face, searching for a reaction, but she just smiled weakly. That night in my hotel room, I called my best friend Janet. "Something feels off about this guy," I told her. "He treats Elizabeth like a trophy, not a partner." "Maybe it's just first meeting nerves," Janet suggested. "Give him another chance." I tried to keep an open mind, but my unease grew when Elizabeth announced their engagement just 8 months after they started dating. The wedding was rushed and lavish, dominated by Matthew's family's preferences. Elizabeth had always talked about a small ceremony by the lake, but instead there were 300 guests, most of whom she didn't know. During the reception, I barely got to speak with my daughter. Matthew kept her by his side, his hand firmly on her lower back, steering her from one important guest to another. His mother, Sylvia, pulled me aside. "We're so glad Matthew finally found someone," she said with a thin smile. "Elizabeth has potential, but she needs polishing. Don't worry, we'll take good care of her." After the wedding, my calls with Elizabeth became less frequent. When we did talk, Matthew was always in the background, sometimes even picking up the extension to join our conversations. Elizabeth stopped sharing details about her life and work. Our talks became surface level, weather, general news, nothing personal. I tried visiting them in their new house, a wedding gift from Matthew's parents in an exclusive neighborhood. But each time I suggested a date, Elizabeth would find a reason why it wasn't convenient. When I finally did visit 3 months after the wedding, I barely recognized their home as a place my daughter would live. Everything was formal and perfect like a showroom. No photos of Elizabeth's childhood or college friends. No books, though Elizabeth had always been an avid reader. During that visit, Matthew rarely left us alone, and when he did step away to take a call, Elizabeth seemed to tense up rather than relax. As I was leaving, I hugged her tight and whispered, "Are you happy, sweetheart?" For a second, I felt her body stiffen before she pulled away with a too bright smile. "Of course, Mom. I have everything I could want." But her eyes told a different story. As I drove home that day, tears blurred my vision. My vibrant, independent daughter was fading away, and I didn't know how to reach her. The changes in Elizabeth became more apparent with each passing month. When we did manage to see each other, I noticed how thin she had become. Her collarbones jutted out sharply under her expensive blouses. The dark circles under her eyes suggested she wasn't sleeping well. Her once confident voice had become quieter, more hesitant. 6 months into the marriage, Elizabeth called to tell me she had quit her job at the law firm. "But you loved that job," I said, unable to hide my surprise. "You worked so hard to get there." "Matthew thinks it's better if I focus on our home and family right now," she replied in a flat tone I didn't recognize. "His career is taking off and someone needs to manage the household." "Is that what you want?" I asked carefully. There was a long pause before she answered. "It's what's best for us right now." During a family gathering at Thanksgiving, I watched as Matthew controlled every aspect of the evening. Elizabeth moved nervously around the kitchen, constantly checking with him before making any decision, even something as simple as which dishes to use. When she accidentally dropped a serving spoon, I saw fear flash across her face as she quickly glanced at Matthew. His mother, Sylvia, sighed loudly. "Elizabeth, dear, how many times must we remind you to be more careful? These are family heirlooms, not your mother's everyday kitchenware." I bit my tongue, not wanting to create a scene that might make things harder for Elizabeth. But when I tried to help her in the kitchen, Matthew smoothly intervened. "Barbara, you're our guest. Why don't you join my father in the living room? Elizabeth and my mother have everything under control here." Throughout dinner, Matthew corrected Elizabeth's table manners, her pronunciation of certain words, even the way she held her wine glass. Each criticism was delivered with a smile, as if he was doing her a favor. His family nodded approvingly occasionally, adding their own helpful suggestions. When Elizabeth excused herself to use the bathroom, I followed her. In the hallway, I gently grabbed her arm to stop her. She winced and pulled away. Before she could stop me, I pushed up her sleeve and saw the bruises, finger-shaped marks that couldn't be explained away. "He did this to you," I whispered, my heart pounding. "No, Mom, it's not what you think," she said quickly, rolling her sleeve down. "I fell against the banister when I was carrying laundry upstairs. I bruise easily, you know that." I didn't believe her, but the fear in her eyes stopped me from pushing further. Before we could continue, Matthew's voice called from the dining room asking what was taking so long. The moment was gone. After Thanksgiving, Elizabeth became even harder to reach. My calls went to voicemail. My texts received brief, generic responses that sometimes took days to arrive. I sent cards and care packages, which she acknowledged with quick thank you texts that felt written by a stranger. In January, I received a call from Amanda, Elizabeth's best friend from college. "Barbara, I'm worried about Elizabeth," she said. "I went to surprise her for lunch yesterday, but when I got to her house, she seemed terrified to see me. Matthew came home unexpectedly while I was there, and he was cold. He made it clear I wasn't welcome. Before I left, Elizabeth hugged me and whispered that she couldn't see me anymore. Something's wrong." Amanda's call confirmed my worst fears. I spent the next few weeks researching domestic abuse, recognizing too many patterns in Elizabeth's situation: the isolation from friends and family, the financial control after quitting her job, the physical changes in her appearance and demeanor, the potential physical abuse she was hiding. I called Elizabeth's old law firm and managed to speak with her former mentor, Patricia. After I explained my concerns, she sighed heavily. "I was afraid of this," she admitted. "Matthew had a reputation here. His previous girlfriend left the firm abruptly. There were rumors of controlling behavior, but nothing we could prove. Elizabeth was so determined to see the good in him. When she resigned, she seemed diminished somehow. I tried to stay in touch, but she stopped responding." As winter deepened, so did my worry. Elizabeth missed our traditional Christmas shopping trip for the first time in 20 years, claiming she was too busy with preparations for hosting Matthew's family. When I tried to call on her birthday in early December, Matthew answered and said she was napping and couldn't come to the phone. He promised she would call me back, but she never did. 2 weeks before Christmas, I tried calling every day. My calls went straight to voicemail. I sent texts that showed as delivered but remained unanswered. The silence was deafening, and my intuition was screaming that something was terribly wrong. I felt helpless watching my daughter disappear into this marriage. Every attempt to reach her seemed to push her further away, or worse, put her at risk of Matthew's anger. But I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I called domestic violence hotlines seeking advice on how to help someone who might not be ready to admit they need help. The counselors were compassionate but careful. "You can't force someone to leave before they're ready," one advised me. The most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is often when the victim tries to leave. Keep the lines of communication open. Let her know you're there without judgment. I tried to follow this advice, sending Elizabeth casual texts that required no response. "Thinking of you today. Saw this book and thought of you. Love you, sweetheart." Sometimes days would pass before I'd get a brief reply, usually just a heart emoji or "Thanks, Mom." I reached out to some of Elizabeth's old friends from law school, hoping one of them might have maintained contact. Most hadn't heard from her in months. One friend, Jessica, told me Elizabeth had canceled plans last minute several times before eventually stopping responding to invitations. "The last time I saw her," Jessica said, "she kept checking her phone saying Matthew would be wondering where she was. She left our coffee date after only 20 minutes because she said she needed to get home to prepare dinner. It was 10 in the morning." I decided to try a different approach and mailed Elizabeth a package of her favorite books and homemade cookies, things that reminded her of home and our bond. I included a letter telling her how much I loved her with no accusations or questions about Matthew. A week later, I received a thank you note in the mail, but the handwriting didn't quite match Elizabeth's usual style. It was too perfect, too formal, as if someone had been watching her write it. With each passing day, my determination grew. I drove by their house twice, hoping to catch Elizabeth alone, but both times Matthew's car was in the driveway, and I knew showing up unannounced might make things worse for her. I tried researching Matthew's family more thoroughly. His father, Richard, was a prominent real estate developer with political connections. His mother, Sylvia, chaired several charity boards and was known for her lavish fundraisers. On the surface, they were the perfect family, wealthy, influential, respected. But digging deeper, I found old newspaper articles mentioning a domestic disturbance at their home years ago, quickly buried and never followed up on. I also discovered that Matthew's previous girlfriend had filed a restraining order against him that was later dropped. The court records were sealed, but a clerk who remembered the case told me the young woman had appeared frightened when she withdrew her complaint, a man in an expensive suit standing silently behind her in the courtroom. 3 weeks before Christmas, I received a strange brief call from Elizabeth. She sounded rushed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I can't talk long. I just wanted to say I love you." "Elizabeth, sweetheart, are you okay? Are you safe?" I asked, my heart pounding. There was a pause, and I heard a door open in the background. Her voice changed immediately, becoming artificially bright. "Yes, I found that recipe you asked about. I'll email it to you. Thanks for calling." Then she hung up. No email ever came. I called the local police department to request a welfare check, but they called back saying Elizabeth had answered the door, appeared perfectly fine, and assured them everything was okay. The officer mentioned that her husband had been very cooperative, explaining that my concern, while appreciated, was unnecessary and possibly related to my difficulty accepting their marriage. I felt utterly powerless. The system seemed designed to protect appearances, not truth. Elizabeth was surrounded by Matthew's influence, his family, his connections, his money. How could I break through that wall? The week before Christmas, I sent a final text. "Thinking of you during the holidays. I miss our Christmas traditions. I'm here if you need me. Day or night, no questions asked." No response came. As Christmas Eve approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I pictured Elizabeth alone in that cold, perfect house, possibly in danger while I sat safe in my home. The thought became unbearable. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to let another day pass without seeing my daughter face to face. If Matthew and his family were going to put on a show of holiday perfection, I would be there to see it for myself. And maybe, just maybe, find a moment alone with Elizabeth. Christmas Eve dawned clear and bitterly cold. I woke early, having barely slept the night before. My decision to drive to Elizabeth and Matthew's home that evening felt both desperate and necessary. I had no invitation, no confirmation that they would even be there, but my motherly instinct was screaming that my daughter needed me. Throughout the day, I prepared as if for a mission. I wrapped Elizabeth's gifts carefully. A soft cashmere sweater in her favorite blue, a first edition copy of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice that I'd found at an antique bookshop, and a silver locket containing a photo of us from her law school graduation. These weren't just presents, they were reminders of who she was before Matthew. I baked her favorite cookies, ginger molasses that we'd made together every Christmas since she was tall enough to stand on a chair at the counter. The familiar scent filled my kitchen, bringing back memories of happier times. As I packaged them in a tin, I wondered if Matthew allowed such ordinary treats in their showcase home. Around 4 p.m, I checked the weather forecast one last time. Snow was expected later that night, so I needed to leave soon to avoid the worst of it. I packed an overnight bag just in case and loaded my car with the gifts and cookies. I also tucked my phone charger, a first aid kit, and an extra blanket into the back seat. A mother's instinct for preparation that would prove more necessary than I could have imagined. The 3-hour drive to their suburban Chicago home felt interminable. As dusk fell, the temperature dropped sharply. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I rehearsed what I would say if Matthew answered the door. I needed to be calm, non-confrontational, giving no reason for him to turn me away. "Just a surprise Christmas visit," I practiced aloud in the car. "I was missing Elizabeth and thought I'd drop off some gifts." Snow began to fall lightly as I turned into their exclusive neighborhood. Holiday decorations adorned every home, tasteful displays of white lights and evergreen wreaths. Matthew and Elizabeth's house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, a large colonial-style home with perfect symmetry and a 3-car garage. As I approached, I noticed several cars parked in the circular driveway. My heart sank. They were clearly hosting a gathering, which would make it even harder to speak with Elizabeth alone. I parked on the street, not wanting to block their guests. Through the large front windows, I could see a Christmas tree sparkling in the living room, easily 8 feet tall and decorated in a coordinated theme of gold and burgundy. Nothing like the mismatched sentimental ornaments that had always adorned our family tree. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the gifts and made my way up the shoveled walkway. Before I could reach the front steps, something caught my eye. A figure sitting on a bench on the side porch. Even in the dim light, I recognized my daughter's silhouette. Why would she be sitting outside in 20-degree weather? I changed direction, my boots crunching on the frozen grass as I made my way around to the side of the house. As I got closer, the scene became clear and horror washed over me. Elizabeth was huddled on the bench wearing only a thin cocktail dress. No coat, no scarf, not even a blanket. Her arms were wrapped around herself, her body shaking violently from the cold. Her hair, which she'd always worn long, had been cut into a severe short style that made her face look gaunt. Her lips were tinged blue, her skin pale as the snow now falling around us. But it was her eyes that truly broke my heart. Red from crying, filled with a mixture of shame, fear, and resignation. When she saw me, shock replaced all other emotions. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, I heard laughter from inside the house. Through the side window, I could see the dining room where Matthew, his parents, and about 10 other well-dressed guests were gathered around a long table. They were raising champagne glasses in a toast, faces flushed with warmth and alcohol, completely unconcerned about the woman freezing just outside their walls. "Elizabeth, what's happening? Why are you out here?" I asked, already shrugging off my coat to wrap around her shoulders. She flinched away from my help, glancing fearfully at the window. "Please, Mom, you shouldn't be here. It'll only make things worse. I just need a few more minutes and then I can go back in." "Go back in? You're freezing to death." I couldn't keep the anger from my voice as I finally managed to get my coat around her. Her body was ice cold to the touch. "I ruined the gravy," she explained in a small voice. "Sylvia said it was watery and tasteless. Matthew thought I needed some time to reflect on how my carelessness affected everyone's meal." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. My daughter, my brilliant, kind, accomplished daughter, was being punished like a child for a minor mistake, left to freeze while her husband and his family celebrated without her. "How long have you been out here?" I demanded. "Not long," she lied, but her violent shivering told the truth. "That's it. You're coming with me. Now." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, but she resisted. "I can't. Matthew will be furious. They're all here. His boss, his parents' friends. It's an important night." "More important than your life?" I asked. "Elizabeth, you could get hypothermia out here." Through the window, I watched as Matthew's mother noticed us. She leaned over to whisper something to her son. Matthew's head snapped up, his expression darkening as he excused himself from the table. "He's coming," Elizabeth whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Mom, please just go. I'll call you tomorrow." But I had seen enough. Years of concern, months of helplessness, weeks of fear, all crystallized into a single burning determination. I wasn't leaving without my daughter. "No," I said firmly, helping her to her feet. "We're facing this together." And with Elizabeth leaning heavily against me, still shaking uncontrollably from the cold, I guided her toward the front door, ready to confront the man who had reduced my vibrant daughter to this frightened frozen shell. With my arm firmly around Elizabeth, I led her to the front door of the house. Her entire body trembled against mine, whether from cold or fear, I couldn't tell. Probably both. As we reached the door, it swung open and Matthew stood there, his handsome face arranged in a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Barbara, what a surprise," he said smoothly, then looked at Elizabeth with practiced worry. "Darling, I was just coming to check on you. You've been out there much longer than you should have been." His tone suggested a light reprimand for a child who had chosen to play too long in the snow, not a husband who had forced his wife outside in freezing temperatures. "She's hypothermic, Matthew," I said, my voice low and controlled despite the rage building inside me. "She needs to get warm immediately." He stepped back, allowing us to enter the warm foyer. The heat hit Elizabeth like a physical force, causing her to gasp. I could see the painful tingling of circulation returning to her extremities in the way she winced. "Let me take her upstairs for a hot shower," I said, not asking permission. "That won't be necessary," Matthew countered smoothly. "Elizabeth, go change quickly. Our guests are asking about you." Elizabeth looked trapped between us, her eyes darting from my face to Matthew's. I could see the inner struggle as years of conditioning battled with her instinct for self-preservation. "I need to get warm first," she finally whispered, barely audible. Something flashed in Matthew's eyes, cold fury quickly masked by concern as he noticed me watching him closely. "Of course, darling, but hurry." As Elizabeth started toward the stairs, Matthew tried to take her arm from me, but I held firm. "I'll help her," I insisted, meeting his gaze directly. He stepped back, his jaw tightening. "Fine, but please be quick. It's rude to keep guests waiting." As we climbed the stairs, I could feel Elizabeth's body gradually warming under my coat, though her trembling hadn't subsided. The master bedroom was at the end of the hallway, a showcase of expensive taste without personality. The attached bathroom was all marble and glass, intimidatingly perfect. I turned on the shower, adjusting it to warm but not hot, knowing that too much heat could be dangerous for someone in her condition. As the steam began to fill the room, Elizabeth stood motionless, staring at the floor. "Can you manage from here?" I asked gently. She nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "Mom, you should go. This is going to cause so much trouble." "I'm not going anywhere," I promised, squeezing her ice-cold hands. "Take your time getting warm. I'll be right outside." While Elizabeth showered, I took the opportunity to look around their bedroom. On the surface, everything was immaculate. No personal items left out, nothing out of place. Opening her closet, I found rows of expensive clothes, all in subdued colors, all perfectly arranged by type and color. Nothing like the vibrant, eclectic wardrobe my daughter once loved. On her nightstand, I noticed a prescription bottle. Anti-anxiety medication with a recent date. Next to it lay a leather-bound planner. A quick glance showed every day meticulously scheduled with notes in the margins. Prepare Richard's favorite dessert. Call florist about Sylvia's preference. Weight 118 clobs, still 2 pounds over goal. My heart sank further. The control extended to every aspect of her life. Her time, her body, even her mind. When Elizabeth emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a thick robe, some color had returned to her face, but her eyes still held that haunted look. "You need to eat something warm," I said, helping her to sit on the bed. "I can't go downstairs like this," she replied, gesturing to the robe. "Sylvia would have a fit if I appeared at dinner improperly dressed." "Then I'll bring something up," I insisted. Before she could protest, I headed downstairs. In the dining room, the party continued as if nothing was wrong. Matthew was at the head of the table, laughing at something his father had said. His mother, Sylvia, was the first to notice me. "Barbara," she said, her voice carrying just enough to silence the table. "How unexpected. Is Elizabeth joining us soon?" All eyes turned to me. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when you finally confront what you feared for so long. "No, she's not," I replied clearly. "She's suffering from exposure after being forced to sit outside in freezing temperatures. I'm getting her something warm to eat." The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the uncomfortable shifting, the sideways glances, the nervous throat clearing of people confronted with an uncomfortable truth at their pleasant dinner party. Matthew recovered first, rising from his chair with a practiced, apologetic smile. "I'm afraid my mother-in-law has misunderstood the situation. Elizabeth chose to step outside for some air after a small mishap in the kitchen. I was about to check on her when Barbara arrived." Sylvia nodded, adding, "Elizabeth has always been sensitive. Taking a moment alone to compose herself is something we've encouraged." A woman across the table, perhaps sensing the tension but not its true cause, offered awkwardly, "We all need a breather during holiday stress." I looked at each of their faces. The uncomfortable guest's Matthew's concerned mask, Sylvia's rigid smile, and something in me snapped. "She was outside for over an hour in a sleeveless dress," I stated flatly. Her lips were blue. She could barely stand. "This wasn't taking a breather. This was punishment, and you all sat here enjoying yourselves while she suffered." Matthew was beside me in an instant, his hand gripping my elbow just a little too tightly as he steered me toward the kitchen. "Barbara, you're upset and misinterpreting things," he said, his voice low but hard. "Elizabeth has been struggling emotionally lately. Her therapist suggests she's creating drama for attention. I've been very patient." "Patient?" I pulled my arm from his grasp. "You call leaving your wife to freeze patient? She chose to stay out there." He insisted, his facade beginning to crack. "I suggested 5 minutes to cool off after she embarrassed my mother by serving substandard food. Elizabeth always exaggerates these situations." From behind us, Sylvia's voice chimed in. She had followed us to the kitchen, concern for appearances clearly outweighing any for her daughter-in-law. "Barbara, I understand a mother's concern, but Elizabeth needs structure and guidance. She came to us without proper social training. We've been very accommodating of her background." The condescension in her voice made my blood boil. Before I could respond, Elizabeth appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had dressed in a simple black dress, her hair carefully combed, though she still looked pale and shaken. "Mom, please," she said quietly. "Let's not make a scene." "This isn't a scene, Elizabeth. This is the truth," I replied, not taking my eyes off Matthew and his mother. "And it's long overdue." Matthew approached Elizabeth, placing his arm possessively around her waist. "Darling, I was just explaining to your mother that you've been having one of your episodes. Why don't you take your medication and lie down? I'll make your excuses to our guests." I watched my daughter's face closely. For a moment she leaned into Matthew's embrace, the weight of conditioning and fear pulling her back into her role. Then her eyes met mine, and I saw something flicker there, a spark of the strong woman I had raised. "I haven't had an episode," she said, her voice barely audible. "I made a mistake with the gravy. That's all." "Elizabeth," Sylvia interjected sharply, "we've discussed this. Taking responsibility means accepting consequences gracefully, not creating drama in front of guests." "The consequence for gravy," I repeated incredulously, "was hypothermia." Elizabeth's body straightened almost imperceptibly. "It wasn't just today," she said, each word seemingly requiring immense effort. "Last week, I wore the wrong earrings to Richard's office party. Matthew took away my car keys for 3 days. Before that, I spoke too much to one of his colleagues. I wasn't allowed to eat dinner that night." The kitchen fell silent. In the dining room beyond, the uncomfortable murmur of guests sensing conflict but pretending not to continued.
"Those are lies,"
Matthew hissed, his charming facade crumbling completely.
"Barbara, your daughter has been seeing a psychiatrist for delusional behavior. This is exactly what we've been dealing with."
But Elizabeth continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation.
"When I suggested visiting Mom for Thanksgiving, you bruised my arm, grabbing me. When I wanted to call Amanda on her birthday, you threw my phone against the wall. When I didn't lose the weight you wanted, you called me disgusting."
Matthew's face contorted with rage.
"Shut up,"
he growled, forgetting our audience.
"You ungrateful, pathetic. That's enough."
I stepped between them, facing Matthew directly.
"You will not speak to my daughter that way. Not ever again."
Sylvia attempted to salvage the situation, her society smile strained to breaking point. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to calm down. Matthew, the guests."
"To hell with the guests,"
Elizabeth said suddenly, her voice clear and steady for the first time that evening. The room fell silent in shock at her outburst. "I've spent 2 years trying to be perfect for you, for this family, and it's never enough. I'm done." Matthew's face darkened dangerously.
"You're not going anywhere. You're my wife, and you're clearly having a mental breakdown. Barbara, I think it's time for you to leave." "I'm not leaving without Elizabeth," I stated firmly. "Then I'll call the police," he threatened. "Have you removed for trespassing?"
I laughed without humor. "Call them. Please do. Let them see your wife's medical condition from being locked outside. Let them hear from the guests who watched you enjoy dinner while she froze." At the mention of witnesses, Matthew's confidence faltered. His eyes darted to the dining room where his career connections and family friends sat listening to every word.
"Elizabeth,"
I said, not taking my eyes off Matthew. "Go upstairs and pack what you need. You're coming home with me tonight." For one breathless moment, I wasn't sure she would find the courage. Then she nodded and slipped past Matthew toward the stairs. He moved to follow, but I blocked his path. "Don't," I warned. "You've done enough damage." "This is ridiculous," Sylvia sputtered. "Elizabeth is part of our family now. She belongs here." "No," I replied evenly. "She belongs where she's safe and valued. That's not here." The next 20 minutes were tense. Matthew paced the kitchen, alternating between threats of legal action and attempts to convince the increasingly uncomfortable dinner guests that everything was fine. His father joined us, trying to use his authoritative presence to intimidate me, but I stood my ground. When Elizabeth returned, she carried only a small suitcase and her purse. I could tell she'd been crying, but there was also relief in her eyes. The look of someone who had been drowning and finally reached the surface. "I'm ready," she said simply. Matthew made one last attempt, his voice low and menacing. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. Everything you have is because of me and my family. You'll have nothing." Elizabeth looked at him steadily. "I had myself before I met you. Somehow I lost that. I'm going to find her again." As we walked toward the front door, Sylvia called after us. "This is how you repay us, after everything we've done for you. This behavior just confirms what we always thought. You were never good enough for our son." Elizabeth paused, and for a heart-stopping moment I feared she might waver. Instead, she turned to face her mother-in-law. "You're right about one thing, Sylvia. I wasn't good enough for your son. I deserved much better." With those words, we walked out into the snowy night. As I helped Elizabeth into my car, I could see Matthew watching from the doorway, his face a mask of thwarted rage. But he made no move to stop us, too aware of the neighbors and guests who might witness further ugliness. As we drove away from the house, Elizabeth began to sob, deep, wrenching cries that seemed to come from her very soul. I reached across to hold her hand, feeling her fingers grasp mine with desperate strength. "You're safe now," I promised. "We'll figure everything out together." Through her tears, my daughter gave me the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. "Thank you for coming for me, Mom. Thank you for not giving up." As we left the perfectly manicured neighborhood behind, snow falling gently around us, I felt both profound relief and fierce determination. The road ahead would not be easy, but we would travel it together just as we always had before Matthew entered our lives. The journey back to my house that night was both an ending and a beginning. Elizabeth slept for most of the 3-hour drive, exhaustion and emotional release finally overtaking her. I kept the heater running full blast, occasionally glancing over to reassure myself that she was really there, really safe. When we arrived home after midnight, the house was dark except for the porch light I'd left on. It felt symbolic somehow, this beacon in the darkness guiding us home. Elizabeth woke as I turned off the engine, momentarily disoriented before reality rushed back. "We're home," I said softly. "My home. Our home." That first night I made her tea and toast, all she felt capable of eating. We didn't talk much. There would be time for words later. Instead, I simply held space for her, letting her know through my presence that she was safe, that she could breathe again. She slept in her old bedroom unchanged since her college days. In the morning, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over old photographs and mementos, touchstones to the person she had been before Matthew. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confessed when I brought her breakfast. "He took everything piece by piece so gradually I barely noticed until there was almost nothing left." "Almost," I emphasized, sitting beside her. "But not everything. You're still here. The core of who you are can't be destroyed." The weeks that followed were both challenging and healing. The day after Christmas, Matthew began calling, first with threats, then with tearful apologies and promises to change. Elizabeth listened to the first few messages, her hand trembling as she held the phone, but eventually asked me to screen them. "I can't hear his voice right now," she explained. "It pulls me back to that place where I doubt myself, where I think maybe it was all my fault." We found a therapist specializing in domestic abuse recovery. Dr. Laura Simmons had a gentle manner but uncompromising clarity about what Elizabeth had experienced. "What happened to you was not your fault," she told Elizabeth in their first session, which I attended for support. "Abusers are experts at finding strong, vibrant people and systematically dismantling their sense of self. Your strength didn't fail you. It kept you alive until you could escape." With Dr. Ham Simmons's guidance, Elizabeth began the slow process of reclaiming herself. There were nightmares and panic attacks, moments of crushing doubt and guilt. There were days when she couldn't get out of bed, when the weight of everything she'd endured finally had space to be felt. But there were also small victories. The first time she chose her own meal at a restaurant without looking to anyone for approval. The day she cut her hair how she wanted it, not how Matthew had insisted. The afternoon she called Amanda her old friend and talked for hours, rebuilding a connection Matthew had severed. 3 weeks after Christmas, Elizabeth was ready to take legal action. We found a lawyer, a formidable woman named Diane, who specialized in domestic abuse cases. When Elizabeth worried about affording her services, Diane waved away her concerns. "Your legal education and experience are still valuable," she said. "When you're ready, I could use someone with your skills at my firm. Consider this an investment in my future colleague. The divorce proceedings were ugly as expected. Matthew and his family used every resource at their disposal, financial, legal, and social, to paint Elizabeth as unstable and delusional. They offered a settlement that would have left her with nothing in exchange for a quick, quiet divorce. Elizabeth refused. "I won't be silenced," she told me after a particularly grueling meeting with the lawyers. "That's what they've always counted on. Shame keeping victims quiet. I won't give them that power anymore." Her courage inspired others. 2 women who had dated Matthew before Elizabeth came forward with their own stories of controlling behavior and emotional abuse. A former household employee provided an affidavit describing the toxic dynamic she had witnessed in the home. The turning point came when Elizabeth's medical records from Christmas Eve were entered into evidence. The emergency room doctor who had treated her for mild hypothermia the day after we left had documented everything. His clinical description of her physical state, coupled with his notes about her fearful behavior and reluctance to explain how she came to be exposed to the cold, painted a damning picture. Matthew's lawyer requested a private settlement conference soon after. Though the terms were confidential, Elizabeth emerged with financial independence and the freedom to rebuild her life without further harassment. Spring brought new beginnings. Elizabeth began working part-time with Diane's firm, gradually rebuilding her legal career. She found an apartment near mine, small but filled with color and books and things she chose herself. She joined a support group for domestic abuse survivors, where she both received and offered healing. Some days were still hard. Healing isn't linear, as Dr. Simmons often reminded us. There were triggers and setbacks, moments when the careful reconstruction of self seemed to crumble. But Elizabeth no longer faced these challenges alone. By the following Christmas, the transformation was remarkable. The haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet confidence. She laughed more easily, spoke more freely. She had made new friends and reconnected with old ones. She had even begun cautiously dating a kind, patient man she met through a volunteer program at the local library. We decided to create new holiday traditions that year. Instead of the formal perfection Matthew and his family had demanded, we embraced joyful imperfection. Our tree was decorated with mismatched ornaments collected over decades. Our dinner was delicious, but not Instagram-worthy. We wore comfortable clothes and played board games and didn't worry about using the wrong fork. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after I had found her shivering in the cold, Elizabeth handed me a small wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this tonight," she said, "to mark the anniversary." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. Engraved on the inside were the words, "You saved me. I'm saving myself. Love always." I couldn't speak through my tears as she fastened it around my wrist. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened last year," Elizabeth said. "About how close I came to disappearing completely. So many women don't get out. So many don't have a mother who shows up unannounced on Christmas Eve." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I worried I was overstepping, that I might make things worse." "But you trusted your instincts," she said. "And that made all the difference." As we sat in the warm glow of the Christmas lights, Elizabeth shared what she'd learned through her support group work. The most dangerous time for someone in an abusive relationship is when they try to leave. But the most important thing they need to know is that they're not alone, that someone sees what's happening and believes them. She had begun speaking at awareness events, sharing her story to help others recognize the warning signs she had missed or dismissed. Her legal work now focused on helping victims of domestic violence navigate the often intimidating legal system. "I couldn't see a way out," she told me. The walls just kept getting higher until I couldn't even imagine there was anything beyond them. But you reminded me that another world existed. You were my lighthouse in the storm. This is the lesson I want to share with all of you watching Trust Your Instincts when something feels wrong with someone you love. Abusers thrive in silence and isolation. They count on our politeness, our hesitation to interfere in private matters. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply show up bearing witness to a truth others want hidden. Elizabeth's journey continues. Healing from abuse isn't a destination but a path. Sometimes smooth, sometimes rocky, but always moving forward. The scars remain, but they no longer define her. She has reclaimed her voice, her power, and her future. As for me, I've learned that a mother's job never ends, that love sometimes means stepping into the storm when every social convention tells you to stay away. I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action in its presence. Most importantly, I've learned that even in our darkest moments, connection and compassion can light the way home. If you're watching this and something in our story resonates with you, please know you're not alone. Whether you're the one in pain or the one watching someone you love suffer, there is help and hope. The first step is breaking the silence. Have you ever had to trust your instincts to help someone you love? Or has someone's intervention made a difference in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Sometimes the simple act of sharing a story can be the lifeline someone needs. Thank you for listening, and remember, in the darkest winter nights, love is the light that guides us home.